So it's my job now to do two things before I let you get on with your days and your lives. The first of which, and let me just bring this back up. I promise I won't show the Skype channel anymore. Okay, so we're back to the cat, but we're past break time. So what should happen is when I advance to the next slide, I should see a set of keywords from our combined set of breakout groups. So let's see what happens. This is, I haven't seen this either. So here we go. Ta-da! Here we go. So as you know, every breakout group was asked to submit 3 words that sort of characterize the conversation, a positive kind of question or statement and a negative. And very interesting. So we have uneasy, domestic, accessibility, aura, interactivity, participation, trust, intentionality, diversity, failing gloriously, distance, mentorship, connecting individuals, eternal prototypes, respect, networking, place, noise, stigma, facilitating, role of the institution, cultural experience, and social bonds. I just want to rewrite the DARIAH strategic plan and just put this in there. Again, I don't have any particular plan as to what to do with this, but we did think that one of the more alienating bits of face-to-face meetings is actually a breakout group that you weren't in gets up and they say, oh yeah, well, it's kind of like in the other breakout group, and you sort of get a sort of a scat impression of all the different conversations you weren't in. So we really wanted to have a sort of a tableau of all the conversations. And I think this is a really, it's an inspiring set of words. And I can't say too much about them now, but going to the 2 questions or comments. So we asked every group to make a kind of a negative comment, a challenge or something that was difficult, and a positive comment, something that was an opportunity or something that there was a pleasure there. And again, I have had 0 time. I'm seeing these for the first time with you, but I think it's interesting to look at what these conversations may have brought us. You know, where it is hard to concentrate, compose oneself, or know when to be heard. Absolutely. Attention of attendees, control of students, multiple channels, risk situations, surveillance. All of these are great challenges and things that we concern. And again, you know, one of the things we thought a lot about in designing this event was, well, are we going to get Zoom bombed? You know, is somebody going to kind of intrude upon this sort of safe space for exchange that we're trying to create? And again, it's a serious question in this format and in this time. What's stopping you from talking about failure? It could be mostly unfounded to think too much about what funders' colleagues may think. Absolutely. I think that is absolutely true. We feel compelled to talk about successes. And so that holds us back. Small conferences are or might be better in handling this. Digital conferences, which by aspiration or default are large, are less suitable. Yeah, and I'll say a word about where I think we might look in terms of larger gatherings. But yes, I do think that having either a particular community or a particular question, again, in the idea that we can use virtual spaces relatively effectively to build on a foundation. Much harder to build that foundation. It's almost like we can get wood, but we can't get bricks. So how do we actually start from the bottom up if we need to? We do not want to lose the connection and the rich experience. Absolutely. I think that there's a real fear, you know, not only that COVID-19 will take this away from us, but that technology companies, as they continue to develop and continue to experiment really on us in some ways, as there are kind of profit models and as there are companies and governments making decisions for us. And of course, we all know, those of us who work in universities and public institutions, that there'll be a lot of pressure on those institutions to cut budgets. Will they push us into things that we may not be ready for or may not want as a community? Personal versus professional life, how much do we share? Sally and her backgrounds, we were having this discussion over the break about people who put virtual backgrounds. I mean, is that an extra level of sharing, or is that an attempt to wrest the professional back out of the personal as we find ourselves much more intertangled in these two? And finally, the environmental impact of travel, the monetary expense, and if we can travel in after times. I think these are all really interesting, really deep concerns. But then we have the positive. To experience new ways to simply be in digital space. I mean, as Courtney was saying, there's a lot of potential there. We just need to find good ways of exploring it. To make interactions more accessible across barriers, economic barriers, career stage, regional. I mean, there's a lot of barriers that some of us don't really recognize. Those of us who are privileged to be able to travel. And maybe this is just a mindfulness bell reminding us we need to be more open. Flexibility and inclusiveness. Again, I think that's a very similar response. Towards a taxonomy of failure, absolutely. The whole idea that we can actually organize and understand failure just as well as we do success. We need to look up inspirational corner about conference formats, flavors, a kind of chocolate box you can choose from. I love the elements. The metaphors are very, very sensory today, which I think is wonderful. Elements other disciplines are good at and what one might try out. And actually, interestingly, looking for examples and looking for research to underpin this event today really did push us to look in a lot of places. It's very much a transverse, and some disciplines do very well. Some disciplines are so different that it's hard to compare. And indeed, you know, here we are trying to fight for the informality when in fact, I mean, if you look at a computer science conference where the paper's already written, you know, does that mean that there's too much formality or too little? Too much, or is it all informality when you get to the conference? So I think there's a lot of cross-disciplinary work we can do on this. Again, the personal versus the professional life, how much do we share? And Zoom offering moments of insight. You get to see where someone lives. Absolutely. And it's, again, I think it's nice if we don't get to connect with that person over a beer and we don't get to make that kind of human connection through the night. You know, maybe we get to see their cat. And somehow knowing a colleague has a cat makes it harder the next time to, I don't know, to forget that little tiny bit of humanity that we grasp about them. So, you know, there are things that we can pull out of this. So thank you very much for these. I know the breakout groups seemed, certainly for me, it seemed very fast. At the beginning, I was thinking, oh God, how are we going to fill a half an hour? Especially since the groups were smaller than we expected. Again, one of the interesting things about social habits around virtual conferences may be that people register, but then actually aren't there. And so that's another thing, you know, a learning from this experiment that we'll take away. And yet, even though the group was smaller than we expected, I mean, we you know, when we got the message for 44 seconds, we're like, oh God, what do we do? Which I realize is always a part of a good breakout session, but here it felt particularly so, in particular as the affordance of the technology is we could have you back like that and everybody's head is spinning after that. So thank you so much. I look forward to digging into the Google Docs as well, because I'm sure that there's a lot represented there. And I hope you all enjoyed those sessions and got a lot out of them. As a way of wrapping up, so I feel like it's important at this point for us to sort of say, so when we said, okay, we're going to do this crazy thing, and we're going to base it on scholarly primitives, that we really did think that through, and that many of the things you will have seen and experienced today or the course of the last week were tied very much to what we thought were these things that might be getting lost. Again, in these meetings that were just simply, we're going to do the same thing and we're going to do it online. And again, I've been in small meetings that have worked well and badly. I've been in very large meetings that have worked well or badly. But there's a number of things that we know are almost always missing in these. So in terms of the semi-formal learning, the sharing, the presenting, the learning, this kind of feedback loop, we did feel that the breakout presentations might do that. Having an embedded sort of mini research project coming from an arts background, I thought would be an interesting way of exploring that. The exhibition, the plenary, and of course our approach to documentation. The fact that we did take recordings, we did ask for notes, we did have various forms of capture and reports as far as we could without it feeling intrusive. In terms of serendipitous discovery, the idea of making new contextualized connections between ideas and people, we hope you felt a little bit of that in the breakout sessions, and maybe also in the exhibition. Maybe if you went through any of it, you found something you didn't expect, or something that piqued your interest, either personally or professionally. And also the encouragement to network, the fact that we very openly wanted you to use that that splitting of your attention we're all used to, but we wanted to use all of that attention in the same direction, even if we weren't able to bring it to the same format. Community identity building, sharing of experiences, embodied and situated learning. Well, okay, so we're not in the same place, but at least we shared stories. We have a story that we share, and I feel very strongly about that. And if you look at those anecdotes, which we called the social dinner, you'll see that. We also felt it was really important to crowdsource a certain amount of the format of the event. So my reflections in the first part were largely driven by the registrations, but also some of the other aspects of the breakout sessions themselves were all drawn from the responses we had from, I think, the first 40 people who registered. The fact that the format was unique, that the tone we tried to keep relatively informal, again, informed, but informal. The fact that we brought in an artistic reflection, the fact that we had this kind of, wonderful idea of this opening breathing exercise, things that hopefully you'll take away. And whether you think they were good, bad, or, whether they were the amazing conference dinner or the weird brown liquid that you don't know if it's tea or coffee, that you'll take those away, and those will become a part of what you might remember about this event, and about those of us who were at this event here with you on this Thursday afternoon. And then finally, we gave a lot of thought to management of constraints. Both, again, that idea of the channeled distraction, but also the technology. And again, one of the reasons I was so interested to hear from Courtney about technology and how that worked was that we were trying to make decisions as to what the right technologies would be. And the original impulse was throw all sorts of technology at it. Yeah, we'll have Mentimeter, and we'll have Mural, and we'll have all these technologies. And we realized, one of the members of the program committee, Michelle Doran, kept saying again and again, cognitive load, cognitive load. And it really was an exercise for us to pull back to a minimum, make it rich, make it interactive, but also not make it something that you really needed 5 screens in order to interact with effectively. So we made sure the tools were well tested, and we made sure we tested them well. We did a number of breakout sessions of our own before this. We made sure we had people, we asked friends, we called in favors to make sure that there were people who were willing to sit in the sessions with us, so that we had 2 to 3 people in every session. And that was part of this kind of social support. And of course, making sure that there was a variation throughout the course of the event, but also a relatively strong narrative. I would have loved to have swapped the voice a lot more, but I was really worried that every time we did that, there'd be a kind of a technical, that kind of the sense of the technical barrier. We'd all be suddenly reminded that we were alone talking to our computer. And I hope you've had some kind of moments in the course of the past hour and a half when you've been able to forget that and just think that you were, kind of in a room listening to an interesting talk or an interesting discussion. When we wanted to kind of gesture towards the future, the first person who was my first kind of port of call was Sarah Kanderdine. I don't know if you know her. She's a professor of digital museology in Lausanne. And who really works day to day with a lot of these technologies for bringing presence together. And she sent me a number of these wonderful images. They're all in the exhibition, and in fact, one of them, the one that's kind of in the center and the bottom, is actually a little video, which is quite interesting to see how this sort of presence wall allows the people to interact, and various other forms of walls and forms of capture. And she said, well, you have to think about this as one to many, few to few, and group to group. And I think there are different constraints. And really, I started to think more and more about, well, are we kind of one to many? Are we many to one? Are we group to group? Are we few to few? What exactly is this meeting? So actually thinking more about what kind of identity we bring into these interactions, I think, is important as we start to determine the right technologies for them. And of course, you know, there's the science fiction level where there is this full telepresence where, you know, we're all in virtual space and it isn't weird the way Second Life was. It feels very natural. It feels like people. But how much do we want and how much can we use? I mean, what's the right balance between the technological affordance and the social contract? And when I think of things like the Google Duplex experiment, where, you know, you know, the software-based personal assistant is making phone calls and not making it clear to the person being interacted with that this was a machine. And you know, the hesitation around that, whether or not that really is something we need to make sure we do, in large part because empathy has a cost. Empathy is something that we are naturally attuned to. We don't want to overuse it in the wrong places. We don't want to invest it in the wrong places. And I have computer science colleagues who talk about, well, you'll have a personalized avatar and, you know, you'll dip in and out of the meeting and no one will know. And, you know, it'll send you a message when you should pay attention when they're talking about something you find interesting. And I think, cool. I immediately think of myself not as the person in the meeting with the avatar, but the person trying to actually convey information. It will narrow, again, it will hold us back. It will narrow what we're able to experience. It will narrow the way in which we kind of build community. So I think we have to keep the technology and the social contract both in mind. And how we escape this incunabulary. And we had a lovely discussion in our breakout session around some of this. And I do really look forward, I don't know if Jeffrey Rockwell is still on the call, but I do really look forward to that book, which I think will have a lot of great ideas for us as we try and think through this shift. I do think we need interaction technologies that take us past these skeuomorphic facsimiles of meetings. And I'd love the idea that we could have productive chaos that is somehow facilitated by the technology. More often the technology feels like this thin fraying rope bridge. And sometimes it breaks and suddenly we all feel at risk. You feel angry, you feel frustrated, you feel when somebody says, I can't hear you, you suddenly feel like, but it's not my fault. I mean, the way in which we're not allowed to play, the way in which we're pushed into these feelings of frustration all too quickly, I think are things that we can turn to our technology developers and say, look, this is what we really need, not just what, you know, not just a kind of something that is, you know, this incunabular reincarnation, this remediation of what a meeting looks like. It's what a meeting feels like that we really need to aim for. And again, this is something that I had thought of, and then I realized that other people had thought of it as well, is the idea of having virtually connected groups. But it's interesting that the reason why I think of it is very much coming from, you know, my conversations with Courtney about the exercise she did, because if you look at the literature around empathy and around shared experience, you realize how important that is. But maybe all we need is just a few people around us to remind us that we are human and they are human. And all those little pictures there too are human as well. And maybe that can help us to feel like the experiences are richer and to make a virtual interaction feel more like something that is really embedded, embodied, and situated. While still remembering that knowledge is nomadic and there will be all sorts of things, you know, happening. You know, we do need to remember that the best practice, the things we need to know about may be far away, but maybe we can experience them better if we experience them as groups and not as individuals. We need to use mobility more deftly, more holistically, more mindfully, more evenly. I believe that the term that came up in our breakout session was that, you know, there are certain people who have access to travel funding and who travel all the time, and there are people who don't. So how do we make that actually more even? How do we actually make that more accessible? And some of that is accessible in terms of different kinds of demographics, and some of that is accessible in terms of different kinds of experiences. People who need to travel with families, maybe we need to let people travel for longer times. Maybe we need to send people on a Wanderjahr, where they kind of go from place to place as a young scholar. there are schemes to do this, and I'm not saying that there aren't, but maybe we need to think about them differently and understand some of the needs that they can meet. I think there are people have mentioned a lot of platforms and paradigms for informal scholarly interaction. And I think we can hone those more. Again, our exhibition was an attempt to bring something in from the informal and have it inform a face-to-face meeting so that we didn't spend 8 hours on the Zoom call, because anyone who's been in an 8-hour Zoom call knows that they're horrible. They are simply exhausting. And so maybe we can find ways of bootstrapping some of these so that we do feel that when we're in a meeting, we're starting from something we can build on. So we already have the brick of the foundation and we can build up from there, because again, much easier to build on than to build. And then finally, I really think we need to understand the art in our science. And this is for me a serendipitous connection that I made in trying to pull this presentation to kind of frame the event together. It was an article, as you can see, about how computers don't make art, people do. And this is something I've often found myself saying, you know, are you worried that, you know, an AI is going to generate music? And I said, no, I'm not worried an AI is going to generate music. I'm worried that people are going to stop generating music. And I read this quote and I thought, yeah, okay, so if art emerged to strengthen social ties and social status, it can serve as gifts, fitness signals for mating. I'm sure lots of people have met their partner at a scholarly meeting. As displays of status, tribal affiliation, and that the fundamental purpose of art is to affect people's relationships with each other, where the relationships are themselves important. I think that's in some ways what we do. That is the element we are most likely to lose. It's not the science, it's the art. So that's really where I wanted to leave things for today. I do hope you found this a useful event. I hope you've learned something. I hope maybe even something unexpected. I hope you've connected with someone, either someone you know or someone you've never met. And I hope that you kind of go away from this maybe feeling a little more, I don't know, sure of what it is that we need to hold on to. So I'll close there. We'll leave the chat session open for a little while in case anybody has any final thoughts that they want to put in that will become a part of our record. And of course, please, 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 we will be following up with you. It's very important for us to know what aspects of this worked for you, what aspects didn't. And so that we can actually, you know, hopefully publish something about this experiment that might become a part of the longer term body of research on responses to COVID-19, but also responses to increasing interaction in virtual spaces and how we make that literally feel more like a place we want to be. So on that note, I'm very grateful to you all. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch, and I hope you have a lovely weekend. Be safe and be well. Goodbye.